Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely wild. We are going to unpack a deeply fascinating architectural blueprint of global power. Based on the insights of financial author and investor Simon Dixon, we're going to map out the massive transactional power structures that sit way above individual nation-states. If you've ever felt like global events are moving in this synchronized direction that goes way beyond normal everyday politics, well, this breakdown is going to give you a structural lens to view exactly how that machinery operates.
Here is our game plan for today. We'll cover 1. The debt-based foundation, 2. The 3 power complexes, 3. Mechanisms of control, 4. The multipolar transition, and finally, 5. Exiting the system. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. The debt-based foundation, building on fiat. To really understand this entire model, we have to start at the absolute base layer, which is the central banking and monetary system itself.
According to Dixon's framework, modern money is not what most of us think it is. In our current fiat system, money is essentially a debt-based instrument. When a loan is made, money is literally created into existence as a digital credit. But here is the fundamental flaw that drives literally everything else we're going to talk about today. The money to pay the interest on that loan, it's never created. Because of this, the system mandates a constant, perpetual cycle of extraction and forced economic growth just to keep the whole structure afloat. It's a system guaranteed by central banks that absolutely must continually expand or it breaks.
And that brings us to the core game of the system. The people operating at the highest levels of this architecture aren't actually trying to hoard cash. No way. They are using a perpetually depreciating fiat currency, money that's literally designed to lose its purchasing power over time, to acquire real, hard, appreciating assets. We're talking about real estate, strategic choke points, gold, commodities, land. The fiat currency is simply a tool used to scoop up the real resources of the world.
Part 2. The 3 power complexes, the pillars of control. With our foundation laid, let's zoom out and look at the structural pillars that this theory argues actually run the globe.
Notice how the financial complex, or the FIC, sits at the absolute top of the food chain here. Now, the military-industrial complex, the MIC, is massive, requiring constant destabilization and war for revenue and resource extraction. And the technological-industrial complex, the TIC, builds the surveillance grids, the AI data centers, and the algorithms. But notice who the ultimate boss is. The military and tech giants are public companies. They desperately rely on the financial complex to float their debt, manage their shares, and provide them with capital. Finance rules them all.
Here is the really crucial takeaway. We aren't talking about shadowy cabals sitting in smoke-filled rooms rubbing their hands together. This architecture is made up of highly visible public companies. They are bound by cold, hard fiduciary duties to their shareholders, and they require continuous quarterly revenue cycles just to survive. In this framework, they do not view nation-states with patriotic loyalty. They treat governments and populations as subordinate piggy banks to extract wealth from, all to satisfy the massive demands of the debt-based system.
Part 3. Mechanisms of control, the operating system. So, if the financial complex sits at the top of the pyramid, dictating terms to tech and military sectors, how do they ensure politicians actually comply?
The model suggests that the political sphere is heavily managed. Lobbies don't just go out and buy a fully formed president. First, they identify candidates at the local level. Then, if that candidate does what is asked, their funding increases. As they rise through the ranks, the model theorizes that they're introduced into compromised networks where leverage is created against them. Eventually, through debt, conditional funding, and outright blackmail, their complete loyalty to the structural complexes is enforced.
The source material puts it perfectly. Politicians are basically WWE actors. The left versus right infighting is just political theater designed to distract the public. It keeps us emotionally engaged in a completely scripted battle, while transnational capital silently works behind the scenes, ensuring the wealth continues to flow upward directly into the hands of the complexes.
To really wrap our heads around the dizzying scale of the financial industrial complex, let's look at just one central node, BlackRock. They hold a staggering $14 trillion in assets under management. They rose to immense utility during the 2008 financial crisis, essentially gaining the power to dictate which companies lived and died by managing the Federal Reserve's bailout money. That effectively centralized global financial power right into their hands. But it gets even crazier. BlackRock built an AI software technology called Aladdin, and it directs an absolutely mind-blowing $25 trillion of global capital. It's used by pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and central banks.
It allows the financial complex to run massive geopolitical scenario planning. So if a trade route closes or a conflict starts, Aladdin dictates where the world's capital flows, giving this single technological node immense, unparalleled power over global events.
Part 4. The multipolar transition, the global shift. Let's see how this massive machine is currently pivoting into a totally new world order.
Dixon theorizes that the financial complexes have extracted just about all the debt and utility they can from the American unipolar model. That old model relied heavily on pushing IMF debt onto developing nations, forcing resource extraction, and using the military complex for regime change if they stepped out of line. But now, the complexes are migrating toward a multipolar system. This new model is heavily driven by China's Belt and Road Initiative and Gulf sovereign wealth funds, and it relies on infrastructure investment to actually build up the wealth of developing nations so they can become the new consumption markets of the future.
Now, this shift isn't some sudden accident. It's a highly managed, multi-decade transition. It kicked off in the 80s with the rise of securitization. In 2001, China was integrated into the World Trade Organization to become the ultimate hyper-efficient manufacturing base. The 2008 crisis then concentrated financial power into ETFs. And today, we're seeing the final managed transition, using things like tariffs and newly formed regional alliances to carefully integrate Western financial power with Eastern manufacturing capability. Here is where the plot really thickens. Because China built an insulated, sovereign system with strict capital controls, the financial industrial complex couldn't just sweep in and subordinate it the way it did in the West. Because of this, transnational capital must actually negotiate differently now. They can't just rely on pure military destabilization anymore. They're being forced to negotiate for regional stability, and that is exactly why we're seeing a shift where countries in the global south finally have competing options for capital investment, which could potentially lead to a more balanced global market.
And finally, Part 5. Exiting the architecture, the sovereign solution. So with all this massive transnational architecture operating above us, how does an individual actually navigate this shift? Dixon lays out a clear spectrum of sovereignty for the individual. Step 1 is totally mental. You have to actively realize and reject the political distractions that are meant to keep you fighting your neighbor. Step 2 is starving the beast, by avoiding debt leverage and the endless fiat consumption traps that feed the financial complex. And step 3 is taking action by utilizing decentralized assets and finding the right jurisdictions that actually respect your wealth. He argues that the ultimate way to truly opt out of the financial industrial complex is to hold your assets completely outside of their control grids. This means utilizing decentralized technologies, specifically self-custodied Bitcoin. And we aren't talking about Bitcoin held in a Wall Street ETF, because that just feeds right back into the financial complex. We mean holding the keys yourself. It is all about owning wealth without a bank and storing value outside the reach of central bank debasement. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to really chew on. Look closely at your own life. Where do you sit within this global blueprint? Are your daily financial decisions, your debts, and your investments making you a sovereign individual prepared for this multipolar transition? Or are they keeping you subordinate to the complexes? Thank you for learning with us today.